Dr. Nicol also founded the AI Equity Lab, and that's to promote inclusive, ethical, and non-discriminatory AI worldwide. And Wendell Wallach, masses of things to say, but let's keep it down to this. He's a renowned scholar and author whose work bridges ethics, governance, and technology. So you can kind of see where the conversation is going to be steering. But I thought what would be useful, because we're talking about safety in AI, you can mean a lot of different things when it comes to that. So I'm going to start with you, Mona. What does AI safety mean to you?
Yeah, for me, AI safety is ultimately about protecting humans, human values, protecting our environment. I think if you currently look at how people are using AI in their private lives, right, and also at work, but in their private lives, they are using it for companionship, for coaching, for finding purpose. And these are all examples of what make us human. So I think AI safety for me is ultimately about protecting that.
Protecting humans, what about you, Nicol?
Well, hello everybody. So happy to be here at the AI Summit, and good morning.
Good morning.
So I think AI safety is something that we should consider as harm reduction, and in particular, thinking about what Mona said, for companies that are out there today, AI safety really has a lot to do with ensuring that consumers trust your products. I think we talk a lot about the technical standards and we talk a lot about the societal implications, but at the end of the day, the people on the other end have to be customers. And if customers do not feel that our products are safe, we're actually not going to see the type of increased adoption. So that can go across the gamut from critical infrastructure to retail banking to anything related to healthcare, education, or other high-risk applications. Safety encompasses that all.
It absolutely does. And then over to you, Wendell.
Well, safety is a term that really has expanded its meaning just as there's been an expansion of our lists of what can go wrong. So for many technicians, safety really means the controllability of systems, particularly advanced systems that we might build. But I think for most of it, it's focused more on doing no harm and really honoring human rights.
Interesting, isn't it? So if we kept those three principles, humans at the center of AI, trust in the systems that we're building, and ultimately do no harm, that would provide some very useful guidelines to steer where we're going into the future. Now what I'm going to do next is a quick fire round, and I'm going to get you involved, so listen in closely to my questions, and it's going to be quick. On a scale of 1 to 10, so 1 is worst, 10 is best, at a global level, to what extent do you think governments, tech giants, industry, and international organizations have already got those safeguards in place in terms of AI and its future development? Nicol, I'm gonna ask you first.
Well, if there was a scale of 0 to 10, maybe I'd lean a little bit that way. I mean, listen, this has been a very difficult space for government, industry, civil society to sort of cooperate. And the reason it is because each of them have different entry points. Civil society comes in from a civil rights, human rights perspective. Industry is just trying to make the next best idea, right? And that's why we always see this tension between innovation and regulation. And then government regulators are trying to figure out what part of the model should we regulate, even though they are not computer scientists or engineers. So we're not doing a great job. And I'm in the United States. We have a whole set of laws that are probably very different from what's in the EU. Based on the local and state level, and county and province level, there are different ways in which we approach artificial intelligence. So I do think we have to think about what is that uniform umbrella approach, but we're far, far from doing that. If I can, let me say something about my book. I know Karen talked about her book. I wrote a book last year, Digitally Invisible, How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass. It's available wherever books are sold. But the concept is technology going to make all of us digitally invisible.
And that's kind of a frightening prospect.
Yes, I mean, that invisibility is going to come because we've not quite figured out how do we coexist in a technology that is now augmenting the human experience.
Now, did you notice how Nicol kind of very expertly didn't give me her number on a scale, very expertly introduced her book and didn't give me the answer that I was asking for on a scale of 0 to 10.
Well, I would say, I would actually give us some credit and say maybe a 3 or 4.
Okay, brilliant. All right, fantastic. Wendell, over to you. And we're going to make the answers short here because we've got a lot to discuss.
Yeah, I hate to make this difficult.
I know, people hate this
It has
topic.
a lot to do with what sectors, what regions, what nations you're talking about. So actually the EU is, and even China in a very different way, are doing a better job of regulating the technology than America is. But let's say I would go along with probably a 2 or a 3 at the present moment, but we are coming out with a lot of standards about how to deploy AI in the military, how to deploy AI in corporations or corporate governance. So we're starting to at least get some standards in place, or at least recommendations.
There's still a long way to go. What about you, Mona?
Yeah, I tend to maybe sit at a 4 somewhere. I think we are in the past 6-7 years especially, a lot has happened. There's a lot of awareness around safety, and there's a lot of work on the way, international collaboration going on there. But I also do think we need to learn a lot about what safe AI looks like. For example, complex models, what are their capabilities, what are their propensities, how can we translate that into appropriate safeguards? So I would say we are on our way, but we are not there yet.
Okay, so you saw that the answer is between a 2 and a 4. How many of you agree with that? Where would you sit on that end of the scale? If you do, raise your hands. Okay, who feels more pessimistic? Who feels more optimistic? Okay, not many optimists, a few more pessimists, and then a lot of undecideds. Okay, another quick question. How urgent is it to get on with this? Just one number. I think that's an easier question. Let's start with you, Mona.
A 9.
A 9, yeah.
Definitely a 10.
A 10. Wendell?
And
A 10, yeah, okay, so you can see we've got our work cut out for us. And then my final question, and I know we have some skeptics here on our panel, but we talk a lot about superintelligence. How much of a concern is this superintelligence? We will dig into the detail of this later, because I know there's a huge conversation. But if you were to give me again a number from 1 to 10, where would you stand on the issue of superintelligence and your concerns for it? So 1, not worried, 10, extremely worried. Wendell?
you know, for 20 years now, I have phrased myself the friendly skeptic of superintelligence, friendly to the can-do engineering spirit. But to be honest, I have not seen anything to date that convinces me that superintelligence is possible. And I think we have pretty well proved with ChatGPT 5 that scaling is not going to get us there. So I would just say maybe 3.
Interesting. Nicole?
So I would say, first and foremost, I think I'm going to find it highly difficult for a machine to clone me. But I think singularity and AGI is real. And so I think even though there are hypothetical contexts in which we may or may not see this technology deployed, I do think that we need to have the same conversations we're having today on safety. So I would actually place it at more of a concern of 7.
Interesting, okay, we have divergent voices. And what about you, Mona?
Yeah, I would say maybe a 4. I think if I compare it with 10 years ago, I thought by then I thought this is not realistic at all. Now I think with all the technology developments, accessibility, availability of digital data, I think it's becoming more realistic. I don't think it's around the corner, so.
Okay, fascinating stuff. So over to you guys. So back to that second question. Do we need AI safeguards now? If you think yes, raise your hand. Okay, so we have consensus, I think, on that. And then on this question of kind of super intelligence and how worrying is that now? Who thinks this isn't necessarily an issue? If you don't think it's an issue, raise your hand. Okay, a few hands on Wendell's side. And then who thinks we need to get worried?
Yes!
Okay, fascinating. All right, I love a straw poll. But one issue, I think now, so I guess this is how we're going to look at this discussion. I want to look now at some of the worries that we have today and what the safeguards that are in place now, then we'll look to the future, and then we'll get into the whole governance issue. Because Mona, and I don't know if you all followed this, but in May, the CEO of Anthropic, and he's not the only one, has been sounding the alarm bells over jobs. And he said half of white-collar jobs could be wiped out in the next 5 years. Do you agree with that, Mona?
Well, I have a bit more of a nuanced view. I think if you look at the granular landscape of jobs, I do think we see some jobs that are significantly impacted, some jobs to a lesser extent. So, but I think across the board, I think it's fair to say that many jobs will undergo a certain form of transformation. Maybe a personal anecdote. I'm also a university teacher. In the past 2 years, I've often thought, could I be replaced with an AI? Well, if I probably in a narrow way look at my role, you might say yes. But if I look at the essence of what I'm doing, I'm trying to teach students the skills of critical thinking, of forming an informed opinion. And from that perspective, I don't see AI taking that over anytime soon. So I think my role, anyone's role, will change. There will be a transformation, and we will use AI in doing so.
Okay, so that's very interesting. And then what I wanted to dig into, and it's the subject of your book to a degree, is the question of bias. You know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it was all we were talking about like 5-6 years ago, and it's almost become a dirty word, almost a filthy word. So how are existing inequalities going to be impacted by AI systems that's trained on data sets, as we were just hearing, earlier in Karen's speech, that aren't kind of trained on data sets that reflect our diverse societies?
I think that's such a great question, and I appreciate us talking about it here at the conference. When we actually create AI systems, we're fueling these systems by the data which is available to people who are actually designing them. What that means is the data comes in these diverse packages: women, people of color, people with abilities, disabilities, people who live in northern regions, southern regions, people by different incomes. I think it's really important that the industry recognizes that diversity is an asset in how we actually cultivate these products and we disseminate them. The AI world, I tell people there's so much AI for everybody to eat, but what's most importantly, there's a lot of AI that can be consumed, and we miss opportunities when we're not looking at our data sets to be inclusive. The second thing I tell people though, is that we have to be sensitive, and this goes with safety, that we're not creating AI products that bias and create discrimination for certain groups. What does that mean? It goes back to this critical trust. If you are a person who is building AI models for the retail sector, and you've not thought about how different populations interact with that community, there's a likelihood that you'll be very narrow in your approach, and you'll create either positive outcomes or negative outcomes. It's the negative outcomes we all have to be concerned about. What happens when someone goes to your product and realizes that they've been rejected to get a home ownership loan, or the healthcare technology is not actually seeing them, as with facial recognition technology in certain populations, or the literacy of the large language model is not all encompassing, and as a result, you're missing opportunities to be more inclusive. I think these conversations matter for 2 reasons, and I'm glad that I'm here at the conference. They pose reputational risk and liability and financial liability. And companies, particularly startups, do not have the legal bandwidth to fight with many of the concerns that come with the violation of privacy, discrimination, and other human and civil rights concerns. So this is a conversation that I want us to lean into, because if we don't lean into a conversation of how are we developing credible systems that are optimized for the various audiences that ultimately all of us will be consumers of AI, if we don't lean into that question, we're going to develop very narrow band AI technologies that's going to show up in a very crowded space. And if you were here for the last conversation, and will be dominated by 4 or 5 companies. And I think that's an area I think this community, and particularly small and mid-sized businesses and enterprises, can do a much better job of really cultivating that mindset of how does this product look like the customers that I'm trying to reach.
Okay, so that's so interesting, isn't it? So, okay, civil liberties at stake, a job market that is shrinking and changing. Our world probably in the hands of a handful of people. So what does that mean for democracy? What does that mean for the future of democracy?
Well, democracy has been in trouble for a long time. I mean, what does anything mean for democracy today? I think we're all very aware that democracy is being challenged. But it's not just that it's being challenged. For a large part of the public, there has been this question of to what extent it has been controlled by a minority of people. And it is largely structured to favor the interests of a minority of people. That's nothing new. I mean, we've been talking about ruling elites for much more than 100 years, if not going back to aristocracies. I will talk a bit more about this tomorrow because I am doing a keynote talk tomorrow, which is going to be on the tech oligopoly and what it wants. But let us be clear here. If we're talking about 4 or 5 companies, we're talking about a small cadre of people who are also getting 90% of the profitability from these companies, from these technologies. They are going to be inordinately wealthy compared to what they are today. So the AI oligopoly is the old tech oligopoly, but let's say it's going to grow on steroids, presuming one thing, that AI actually produces what we are optimistically hoping that AI will produce. But whether we are hoping that we are going to be in a world where it is actually economically dominated by a small group of people, I think whether we can revitalize democracy or not will be secondary compared to the inordinate power these people have.
Interesting. So if we're looking at this kind of AI autocracy in some respects, I guess they will be kind of developing, and they are developing, kind of agentic AI. So can we trust them to create AI agents, if this, trust was your issue, that are going to be able to carry out those tasks more and more on our behalf?
I mean, look, we want AI agents in areas, and this goes back to the workforce question, where we know we have a huge shortage. Healthcare is one of them, right? Across the world, our amount of global workers in the healthcare space continues to decline. So AI agents that could actually come in and facilitate triage care, or be the first stop for an elderly patient, or help a doctor who is actually looking at someone with a terminal illness understand all the notes. Those are breakthroughs. I actually used to be Debbie Downer on these panels. I try to actually take an approach of, I'm for AI, and I also think that we have to embrace the risk. What does that mean? Again, going back to what we talked about in terms of bias. Are the AI agents trained in the multiple languages? Respectively, we're here in Amsterdam. I can tell you, unless I have my translator on, I don't know what people are saying. We do not want the AI bot to be the same way. It erodes the trust of people. We want to be dependent on these tools. The same thing goes when it looks at AI agents and just how far they go with empathy. There's this new movement right now, so I'm going back to what Wendell said, the humanity of AI. People want to talk to a bot, but they also want to talk to a bot with empathy. But look at what has happened when it comes to tools like character AI and others, where we lean so much into it, we cannot tell the difference between the robot and the human. That's why I say singularity is something we should be talking about right now. And so I think going forward, Isabelle, the question for all of us is, when we roll out these tools, this is what we do at the Brookings Institution for my center, the Center for Technology Innovation. Are we asking the right questions? And are we including the right people at the table? When we are doing agentic AI in healthcare, who is on your development team? Is there a doctor, a patient advocate, a person who understands clinical care, who's helping you to develop those products and services? When we start balancing representation in terms of the model development, execution of oversight and audits, and then bringing in people, real people, to help us know if we're actually on the right course, I think we'll find agents basically become very hyper-manipulative and take over their intended goals.
Okay, that's an interesting thing. So let's just take...
I was the one that was a 10 on the single thing, so...
That's a good point. So then let's go to our 3. Because if we take this one step further, Wendell, this is kind of like AI agents. What about AGI agents? So they've not been trained on being asked the right questions. The wrong people have been in the room. What happens to these AGI agents?
Well,
Change your number, aren't you?
Yeah.
Change your rating.
well, any of you who know anything about me know that I co-authored a book called Moral Machines, Teaching Robots Right from Wrong. And it was the first book to seriously look at whether we can implement moral decision-making faculties in computers and robots. And it probably kicked off what we now call AI ethics, or at least that together with a lot of things that we were talking about separately from what the machines do in the decisions, what we humans are ethically doing in relationship to the machines. And if you go online and you look for a newsletter that is AGI and Ethics, which had its first issue last week, you will find the key article is mine. The opening article or opinion piece is mine, and it asks the question, can an advanced system that does not have moral intelligence be an AGI? And I've been very clear for year in and year out that if you don't really have systems, autonomous systems with a capacity to think through, I'm not talking about simplistic morality where you plug in the 10 Commandments or Yama and Niyama or whatever your set of principles are, or do a simplistic utilitarian consequentialist calculation. Can you create systems that actually can think through the complexity of challenges that we are dealing now and anticipate dealing for the next few decades, in which a confluence of values converge? So if you don't have systems that can at least work with that, and I'm not expecting them to come up with all the answers, I'm fine with having tables where we have other experts sit down, but the AGI, or at least the advanced artificial intelligence, holds a seat. But I'm basically saying, without moral intelligence, there is no true autonomy. There may be limited autonomy within limited spheres, but as Roz Picard, the godmother of affective computing, said 20 years ago, the more autonomy the system has, the more it will need values. Now let me go one step further before, and I will try and make it,
You have
very,
to.
very short. This question of moral decisions, it's going to go on, it's going to haunt us, but that doesn't alter the fact that we already have people claiming we do have AGI. In fact, Peter Norvig and Blaise Karras of Google have both written an article saying that for all practical purposes, the generative models we have can do as well as the average person. Of course, they can do better than most people on a wide variety of tasks, but they lack consciousness, they lack situational awareness, they lack a theory of mind, they lack social skills. I could go on and on. And all of these are fundamental to making complex moral decisions.
Okay, well, look, I just want a quick word to you. I'm going to go to the audience in a few minutes and try and pick a couple of questions from you. But now I just want to look at the safeguards that are in place. Because, you know, we could, for example, be facing a cyber attack. We could be facing many different things, as you're saying, if these safeguards aren't in place. But the EU AI Act does exist. But in February, I don't know if you heard, J.D. Vance was wringing his hands and saying that the EU are too obsessed with safety concerns. But it does seem that time and time again, the EU does set standards that are quite high. People grumble, but they are integrated. So I know that you're integrating the EU AI Act. That's part of your job. So how is that working in terms of businesses? How hard is it for them? What are they saying to you?
Well, I think first of all, I strongly believe that for the long-term success of AI, that we need to be able to trust it and keep it safe.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Then you see in the past years regulation, not only in the EU actually, but in other parts of the world, trying to define what AI safety is, which are specifically the areas where we need to keep AI safe, and also how do we do that. Well, I think I recognize that today, of course, it's a challenge for many organizations to operationalize these requirements, these high-level conceptual safety requirements. At the same time, I think at the same time, yeah, we see that, let's say, translating these requirements in practice is hard for organizations. They want to implement it in practice. If I look at other similar areas historically where safety was important, I do believe in the next few years that organizations will reach a more mature and stable situation on dealing with AI safety on a daily basis. So I think it's a matter of time. We need to start somewhere. Regulation is setting the basis for that. And the implementation is very much top of mind at the moment.
That's really interesting. So Nicol, so that's the EU in many respects, but we see the US and China neck and neck in this race. Are they paying the same amount of attention to kind of regulations, a patchwork of regulations, I would say?
So it's very clear in the United States right now that our particular goal is to compete with China, right? So if you were to ask any regulator or legislator in the US, we see the competition with China as the utmost concern, and that means by any means necessary when it comes to not having any type of regulatory approach. So in essence, that conversation, which is quite binary, sets it up where the conversation on regulation and safety priorities become very minimized. As has been mentioned, the Chinese, however, have data privacy laws, which I think in the US, many of us as policymakers are quite surprised, because compared to the EU and the general data protection rules, the US still does not have a national data privacy standard. That says a lot because AI systems are fueled by data. So that is the gas in which it runs, which means that US consumers and anyone who does business in the US has access to this fuel. But this is the conversation we had earlier about safety, moral compasses, the idea that we want AI systems that work, but we also want democracy to work. And here's where the US, I think, and what we've actually done, there are regulations, but there are more aspirational norms and values. Given the recent AI action plan that was just put out by the Trump administration, there are no consumer protections, but areas like financial services, healthcare, criminal justice, employment, they do have rules of the road that have to be followed. Although some companies would like to throw them out at this particular time because of the deregulatory stance. What I would just say to everybody here, the EU set a standard, I think, for all of the world to maybe look at what you do to balance innovation and regulation. And I think we have to remove from our language that innovation and regulation are actually counterpositive. They can work very complementary if you place it in a space where the innovation side is really looking at the technological advances that we want to make in terms of infrastructure and architecture and ideas and projects and innovation. The regulation could be geared more towards consumer protection. I testified before the US Congress a couple of weeks ago and said policymakers can lean into what they do best, which is protecting humanity. Civil rights, human rights, any type of sectoral guidance, etc., would be useful in that space. So I think, again, we're learning lessons from the EU that regulation is necessary, which is why we have less complaint oftentimes here than in other countries. But we're also, I think, as you said, in a race to win in the United States, and that comes with a variety of consequences and costs, which I think, Wendell, to your point, it also throws out the door the moral compass and the idea that we need to go easy and slow in a way that also could be calibrated for success.
Okay, I'm going to come to you in just a second, Wendell. We're going to get microphones in the room, so if you do have a question, raise your hand, and I'm going to ask Wendell a question while you're cogitating. Okay, let's connect the dots, Wendell. What about, so we've got EU framework, we've got kind of a patchwork of frameworks in the States. What about global governance? Is that in any way likely? What needs to happen? Quickly.
Yeah, global governance is something that we've been working on in one realm or another for about 15 years now, starting with trying to get regulations on lethal autonomous weapons that make decisions, pick targets and make decisions about who lives and who dies. And I've said that that really machines making such decisions is mala and say a form of evil in itself, and we should not allow that to happen. But we have failed. We have failed on lethal autonomous weapon systems. In fact, we've gone up and down in the prospect for international governance of AI. I would say now we're going in two directions. On one hand, the United Nations is putting in place some framework that might be meaningful in international regulation. The Chinese have said that therefore the US is not going to go forward in any way, shape, or form. But it seems to me that even now we could start with some very slow incremental steps. And the one I proposed, and interestingly enough, the last Pope, also proposed it, which is international regulations against scams. Everyone in the world is wasting inordinate amount of time every day on scams, and there's no way to regulate it unless it is done international. Because the first scams, of course, arose in Nigeria, and now we have no idea where a scam is coming from. So that might be a place where we could start to get international regulation, and in doing so, start to put in place the institutions for international regulation, so that when that inevitable disaster is coming, and folks, it's coming because AI is not predictable, that we have at least international mechanisms in place, and we have thought through the processes so that we can actually activate them very quickly.
That is fascinating. So yes, so create the framework already on something everybody agrees on. So do we have any questions in the audience here? Yes, we do. If you could just stand up, make your question very short, and we might try and grab a couple.
So we're talking about competitiveness. We see Holland, we see Europe, we see the United States and China, right? If we're talking about competitiveness, technology, what is your opinion about the upcoming 5 years if we have this heavy regulation in Europe? How do we compete?
I think I'm going to ask Mona to answer that question.
Now, how do we? I think, let's say, of course, I think it's healthy that we have different views in the world around safety, innovation, what pace things need to go. I do think trust is also a key differentiator. So maybe the pace will be different in other parts of the world, but I think ultimately for the long term, as I said, the success of AI in the broadest sense for organizations, for society as a whole, is dependent on trust. So I think the differences in how we look at this matter now, I think the differences will in time become smaller between the balance between innovation and also keeping things safe in general. So there's a huge opportunity also, if you could say, for the EU to differentiate on that aspect, especially in areas where AI is in critical activities, in critical infrastructures like healthcare, like energy transition, these kind of.
I think you've got
Yeah, and I'll be really quick. I think the other area, because you sort of laid it out, EU, US, China, what about the global south? So the competition spectrum could actually be expanded if we looked at other markets where we're able to actually think about AI, not in perceiving them as collateral damage to any AI systems that are built on the periphery, but we look at the African Union, Latin America, the Caribbean, the Southeast Asia, and India, in and of themselves, are actually creating their own marketplace in ways that I think we need to add them to actually look at the next 5 years as one of the major players.
Wendell, you have 10 seconds if you want to.
The hype around innovation and the regulations are going to stop it, it's malarkey. We've been brainwashed on this one. China is as concerned about the health of its citizens as any other country. All of these issues are being dealt with in China, regardless of whether you like the authoritarian administration or not. And in increasing areas, we are finding that companies will not make the investments unless they know what the regulatory playing field is. So let's rethink this, and let's not just buy into, regulations are bad, nothing should stop innovation, and if we don't get there first, it's just a question of who will destroy who. We'll all destroy each other, so, let's stop this.
Okay, so I'm really sorry we can't take any more questions because we're going to run out of time. But I would just like you each to give, keeping an eye on that timer, a quick closing thought. The best step, one step that you'd advise everyone to take when they're thinking in terms of safety, in terms of their lives, their trust, their organizations. I'll begin with you, Nicol.
So first and foremost, as I spoke about in my book, we have to be very conscious that we're creating another layer of digitally invisible people if we don't think about the critical structure of AI, safety, and how it actually imbues trust. That's the first thing. I think also the conversation about data centers, and most importantly, if we've actually done enough to close the digital divide. I was here in Amsterdam about 4 or 5 years ago with the mayor of Yale, and we had a lot of work then to do, and we still have a lot of work to do now. So we can also assume the hype of AI, but what about people who are not connected to suitable infrastructure to be able to get the type of access that they need? And then I would say the third thing is, have good guidance. There will be or will not be regulation, but there will be people looking to companies who exercise in good faith values. So whatever your values are in your company, keep those top of mind in developing your guidance, how you're training, how you're shifting your workforce. Because I think in the end, that will be the caliber of evaluation that consumers will begin to take as a measure that's most effective.
Wendell.
I'm also a tech optimist, or at least somebody for whom the cup is always half full. But frankly, the course we are on right now is disastrous. It's exacerbating inequalities. It's building the surveillance economy. It's filling us with disinformation, misinformation, hype, and scams. It is filling the coffers of a digital elite while it's actually straining the economic system overall. And the difference between the richest and the poorest among us has never been as great in human history. So usually that leads to a revolution. It hasn't happened yet. But I would just say, it's time to stop, reassess what we're doing, and put in place the appropriate safeguards.
And I'm going to give the final word to you, Mona.
Yeah, I think to achieve safety, at least in the foreseeable term, I think for me the key is literacy. So the people that make these systems, the people that use them across the board, making people aware of what the capabilities are, what all the good things are that you can do with AI, but also where the risk or uncertainties sit. And then if you do that across the ecosystem, I think that's the most strong measure and foundation that we can lay for all the good things we will hopefully be seeing in the next years.
Thank you so much. And so really, I think what drew this all together were the opening words in some respects. You know, people, trust, do no harm. Thank you so much for your wise words and your wisdom. A warm hand of applause.